The locomotive in question was the Chesapeake and Ohio 1642. They were classed as H8 Alleghenies, and they were 2666s. These were big steam engines. And they were articulated so they aren't actually duplexes, even though they have two driving wheels. Huge and very powerful. Also, I feel I need to bring this up. At Chesapeake and Ohio, what were you guys doing? This is the second one that I'm talking about that exploded under your watch. And the last one and this one aren't the only ones. Like, CPR has a lot of sunken trains. We've been over that, and we keep going over it. And British Rail has just a lot of bad diesels, especially in the 60s. It seems to be their thing. Was Chesapeake and Ohio's thing blowing up their steam engines? Is that just how you get your jollies? I just wanna... It's just a weird thing that it's you again, is kind of where I'm at with this. But whatever. Now, to the type's credit, the H8 Alleghenies were incredibly good locomotives. They were large, so they were very fuel-consuming. The bigger engines tend to consume more fuel, but they were powerful, capable of pulling incredibly long trains without any need for assistance. And considering they operated in the Appalachian Mountains, that was needed. They needed to be strong, and they were great steam trains. But you may be wondering, well, if these trains were so good, why did it blow up? Well, honestly, the failure itself was the same as the last one. Yep, it was the crown sheet again. I told you this thing is mission critical, and it's very easy to cause a major chain reaction if you don't keep it wet. And in 1642's case, once again, the crown sheet was allowed to become dry, get red hot, and when water was put back inside, a chain reaction was set off, resulting in a horrific explosion. But the reason that this happened isn't as clear as last time. Last time it was the engineer's fault. He simply didn't put water in. Though some people pointed out he may have been trying a technique where the engineer and the fireman will intentionally let the water level drop in an effort to create more steam pressure. This may be possible given that locomotive was pulling an incredibly long train up a grade, so it would have needed the extra power. But I'd argue the CNOT ones were known to pull trains even longer than the one it was pulling, believe it or not. They were incredibly powerful steam trains. There was no reason to push it, given that it was pulling a train it was rated to be able to handle. So unless there was something weird going on that nobody knows about, or the engineer was just trying to build up extra speed, who knows? But that might be a more likely case as to why he allowed, the water to go a little bit lax. But obviously he did it too much because, kaboom. In this case, though, that is not what occurred. 1642 was in West Virginia at the time. On June 9th, 1953, at the time of the accident, it was pulling 123 loaded cars, as well as 2 that were empty. The adjusted tonnage would have been about 10,500, so quite a lot of weight, but this locomotive over this part of the division was rated to be able to pull at least 11,500. So even though this train was enormous, the H8s were designed to handle this level of weight on this terrain. So what did happen? I mean, we know the water got too low and the train exploded, and yeah, it exploded all right. Holy crap, did it explode. The explosion was so violent, not only did it kill the 3 crew members, the driver, the fireman, and the front brakeman, but it actually tossed the boiler up and over, and I feel I need to stress that this explosion threw the boiler. This is a huge locomotive. It's a Mallett-type. It has 2 sets of driving wheels. These are not small trains by any stretch of the imagination, and the explosion was so violent it was able to throw the boiler, as well as push the cab slightly backwards, but that seems relatively minor compared to the, boiler that was just tossed like a rag doll. Unlike the last one, there were no witnesses to the accident since all 3 crew members were killed, so all this information is coming from this report filed by the Interstate Commerce Commission, or ICC. The ICC seemed pretty content to simply say, yeah, they didn't put enough water in the boiler and it blew up. Then that was pretty much it. But that wasn't enough for the families of the men involved. According to the family of the engineer, they felt that the locomotive itself wasn't being properly maintained, and they even mentioned that some of the other crews that also operated this engine complained that some of the gauges weren't operating correctly. And even the ICC points out that a few witnesses state that there were multiple tests and retests of the inner workings of the water system, including the gauges and the pumps, on this particular locomotive. A foreman at Thurmond, West Virginia, stated that when the engine stopped to take on coal there right before the explosion happened, the engineer actually asked him to look at the cold water pump governor and see if it was stuck. For reference, a cold water pump governor is basically the device used to control the pressure of the water going into the boiler, and is in fact not referring to a governor of a place called cold water pump, just so we're clear. He did look at it and found that it was operational, so he put it back in. And then the engine blew up. But the fact that the engineer asked him to look at it suggests that he knew something weird was going on. He wouldn't have bothered the mechanic to look at something if he didn't really think there was a problem, so something was going wrong. And the ICC did note this, and it really bothered the families. The wife of the engineer was awarded $10,000 for his death, which I guess in that era was a lot more money, but still, your husband's dead, and yeah. But there wasn't sufficient evidence to suggest anything was really going wrong with the engine. And this is mostly to do with the fact that there wasn't any evidence to look at after the engine exploded. It would have been incredibly difficult to tell if something was damaged prior to the explosion, because everything was damaged after the explosion. So they were kind of in a bad spot, trying to figure out exactly what would have happened. As far as 1642, well, amazingly, like the last one, it was actually repaired and put back into service, although this particular locomotive would eventually be scrapped. Fortunately, in this case, a few of her sisters are still around. 1601 was donated to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, where it's still on display indoors. The other sister, 1604, was sent around quite a few places, but now sits comfortably at the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore. And so ends our story of the largest steam locomotive explosion ever, and seriously, C&O, please stop blowing up your steam trains. It's really just... No, stop doing... It's one thing to throw them in the water, but now we're just blowing them up. Things are getting extreme around here. I fully expect this series to wind up talking about a train that was catapulted into the stratosphere or something. Like, someone joked about that and said that there was one that was flying. I haven't found that yet. I have not determined if there is currently a train orbiting the planet, but if I ever do find that, you will be the first to know. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.